5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to this week's edition of the EUVC Lowdown, the show that wraps up the week in European venture, discussing the news making the headlines. And joining us today, we have your usual suspects. Dan, our favourite partner from Superseed, Don't Tell Mads. David and Andreas, the dastardly duo of EUVC. And I'm your host, Cathy White, founder of CEW Communications. And of course, this week in VC, Atomico dropped its annual State of European Tech Report, a mammoth report for this year, revealing after the increased activity of 2021, 2022 has seen a slowdown. I'd like to say on behalf of everyone, no shit. But as our pal Dan Taylor at TechEU said, this is perhaps even a return to normal, due in part to decreased competition and market uncertainties. Well, what does this mean? Apparently, according to the report right now, Europe is sitting on a record $44 billion of dry powder, only expected to rise when we see the report again in 2023. So today, we're going to sink our teeth into a few different areas of the report. And I think, guys, let's just start with the actual slowdown. So according to the State of European Tech Report, up until about July, we were going at the same pace as 2021, and then shit hit the fan. Everything slowed down. So, and I know we know this, right? Because we've been talking about it every week. It's been something that comes up. So, thoughts? What are your first reactions to having seen the report this week?
Blimey, where do we start? I agree with Dan. Obviously, Dan's are brilliant.
All Dans are fantastic.
All Dans are fantastic. So supporting the Dans, I think this is a return to normal. We have seen the bubble of all bubbles for the last 20 years, and I think it's absolutely a sensible statement to make that this is a return to normal. And if you look at a lot of the charts, graphs, and all the rear view mirror looking graphics that we see all over LinkedIn, all over the internet, you can see if you drew a line from the normal trajectory going through the bubble to the other side, we are on very, very normal trajectories. There are a few outlier aspects. For example, the amount of, and I'm not going to use the word, the amount of cash baked into the system around how much money there is to deploy into venture is vast. So like with the COVID shock, we've got this cost of living shock or inflation or interest rates or supply chain shock, whatever you want to call it now. There will be a return to normal service. Just the levels of nonsense will not be the same. And also it's worth saying that we have to decouple, and we're going to talk about this later, I know, but we have to decouple what's happened at growth and later stages and what's happening in early stages, because we constantly see these mega numbers go, what the fuck, man, the world's melting. It's not. It's nonsense stuff going on at nonsense levels at the other end of the spectrum. If you are anywhere from pre-seed to, I don't know, Series C, you're not caught up in that bullshit. So I think it is a return to normal. There is a lot of money ready to deploy. There is the shock, and you have to look at the sector and space that you're in, because that's your reality.
Dan, you're saying there that if you're pre-seed and seed, you're not caught up in the nonsense. You haven't, you haven't. And I remember talking to Mess during the bubble, the height of the bubble, and your partner, of course. And we talked about the rise in valuations, and he said, well, we haven't really seen a big rise in valuations. So, and then we had a conversation around, well, why hasn't he really seen that? And I think that it's probably to a large extent, that it's down to the vertical that you specialize in, that you are not looking for the same deals as the ones that ended up being very, very hyped. And that's because I think it's not correct to say that we haven't seen a huge jump in valuations on many deals, because it's definitely been deals in the seed and pre-seed stage that were very, very hot and also having stupidly high valuations. And I think that yesterday I was at a Danish business angel meeting where we had this conversation about what's happening to valuations, and one of the things that they're seeing is that they still have founders coming in with unrealistic expectations, because there's still, if you're not a very seasoned founder and you're not in the tech space deeply, then you're still reading news from and guides from times past.
Founders will always be unrealistic. That's why they're founders, right? I think that's just a unfair comparison.
Yeah, but another thing to go from 10 million valuation to 3 million valuation over over the course of a couple of months of negotiation, right? And what I'm trying to say is just that I think we should recognize that at the seed and pre-seed stage, there's definitely also been a hype cycle going on that led valuations to get completely out of this world over the last 2 years. But then, and you tend to argue the other way around. So I'd love to ask you, do you think that I'm stupid when I say that?
No, I think it's territorially based. I think there's a lot of stuff that happened in the States where people were, there's that famous story of the second time founder in the States pitching a blank deck and saying, I don't have anything, I've got no idea, it's nothing, but it's going to be awesome. And it was a much bigger, brighter, more interesting story than I was giving it credit for. And he raised whatever, £500,000 over a coffee. Now, those kinds of things will always be the outliers, and you'll always hear that. And it's really funny and it's interesting. And I think they're nice kind of anecdotes. I think in the States, there was a lot of pre-seed and seed craze, or more pre-seed and seed craze. I don't think so much across Europe, and certainly not in the UK. You're right to say that we don't see so much of it, and that's partly because we're founders and we've trodden the path. But there's one kind of semi counter, which is at pre-seed and seed to a degree. Don't punch me in the face for this, but it doesn't really matter whether you're raising at 3 or 5 or 7. You need the numbers to work for subsequent rounds, and that's what I'm more worried about for early stage founders, is what happens as the inertia washes through in years and recycles to come. But we'll worry about that when we get there. But if you're raising a pre-seed seed round or early round, it doesn't really matter. The valuation is almost immaterial. You're either going to make it and do really well, or you're not. So whether we've paid 3, 5, 10, all we're trying to do as a VC is structure the round so that subsequent rounds make sense, and you're not killing yourself too early with too much cash, and you're not doing too little and throttling yourself, and there's something for the A's and the B's and the C's to get their teeth into for the later stage investors. So it's more around, there's this common misconception that VCs are here to screw founders, and we talked about founder salaries, I think, another time. It's like, this is just bollocks. I'm screwing myself. If I screw a founder for anything, so valuation or salary, I'm fucking myself, and not in a good way. So it's just not true. It's just nonsense. It's about using cash to create the right weights and measures in a deal. And valuation is a big way to do that. But it's not just, talk about valuations for our round. I'm talking about valuations for the next round. But it kind of doesn't matter whether it's 3, 5, 10. It's almost immaterial.
On that note, Dan, are you seeing, because one GP that I spoke to 2 days ago or so spoke a bit to that of, it's not, as you're saying, like valuation, it is what it is. It's not the most important thing, but are you seeing big differences in terms of the amounts raised, in the sense that during the hype, you'd have maybe founders raising for a runway for 10 months or so, maybe even less, and sometimes, and now probably thinking more in the likes of 18 months to 2 years. Are you seeing that?
Not really. For me, in my world, valuations haven't really changed. And there's a whole vast range of reasons that we probably shouldn't go into because they're so personal to me. I'm not sure that they're useful to anyone to listen to, but they haven't really changed. I think the one thing that has changed is that terms that were quite lax seem to be, that some of the term sheets that we're seeing seem to be like prefs and other kind of more restricted are starting to creep in. And I get punched in the face around tranching rounds a lot, but I think it's very important for the early deals to have a longer term partner in a more positive way around tranching rounds, because any round is a tranche round, but how you can then tie success and jeopardy, the right amount of jeopardy into a deal is really, really important. But I've not seen valuations shift. I think there's a lot of the later and the mid and the later stage teams that are now coming slightly earlier. So there's a natural supply and demand balancing act that is going on, but with this backdrop of what we've already talked about, which is there is a whole world of cash baked into the system, and we have to deploy, otherwise we can't. And now is the time to deploy, but in the right businesses.
But this is the thing, isn't it? Because it's also coming down to where you're investing and which companies you're backing. So if we look at, going back to the report, but one of the big figures in the State of European Tech was that $400 billion of value was erased in 2022.
Of the growth guys.
Of the growth guys. No, yeah, for you, it's fine. But we're also, you'll find out. But for looking into the sorts of businesses where that's all coming off as well, like top level, me not having fully read into everything, it all seems to be the consumer orientated companies that last year were screamed everywhere.
Of course, and it's a lovely headline, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's amazing. Oh my God, $400 billion. It's not even real money. It doesn't mean anything.
But it's off but that's the point, right? Because it's, you say it's off of course it's the growth guys that have been hurt the most because they bought in at those valuations, but it is created value also for the seed stage investor that I'm looking at Hop in here, right? And I know one of the very early investors there. She's not, that's not the greatest thing, right? To see your percentages suddenly be worth much, much, much less.
But what were you expecting with a COVID baby? Did you expect your COVID baby to grow up as a COVID adult? No, you monkeys. Of course not.
I think anyone at Hopin who recognized early enough to do secondaries and get rid. I mean, even the founder was smart. He just got rid of as much equity he saw it coming.
But that was just an example, right? And that's why I'm saying that there are people that, even though it's paper money, that paper money was being, we're making commitments based on your expectation and so on. And as such, you're
right. And also the vacuum, it's left a massive vacuum. There's no pull anymore. There's no pull from the top of it. It's like buying a house, isn't it? It's like you need the top of the market and the middle of the market to draw up the lower market. Everyone needs to step through. I mean, basically we've cut that chain, and that's not good.
Speaking of that business angel group I was in yesterday, right? How do they typically finance their business angel activities? Well, they're selling stocks that they have on the public market. and as they said, right, well, every one of my investments is pretty much twice the cost right now because I need to liquidate my public holdings, and I'm only getting half what I would have gotten. So in that sense, there's also a very real squeeze on the early stage funding there, because the business angels are such an important part of the ecosystem, right? So yes, when we have the VCs, they have dry powder, to use that term, because it's committed to them. Hopefully, we won't see too many LPs not sticking to a hard commit, but Dave and I have seen many soft commits not come through. I keep thinking on to the message that I got from a guy who said, well, I'm very, very sorry, and he was super apologetic and he really wanted to be in, but then he says, but one of my main startup, we just slashed 80% of the staff, so right now I need to reserve cash. And that is a very real situation with everyone who acts with their personal money, right?
Just on that topic of slashing staff, so one of the other big things that we've seen is the massive tech layoffs that have been happening. So going into the figures, it's 14,000 have been let go in Europe, just over 14,000, which is only 7% of the global figure, by the way, which is over 200,000 people right now.
And the same as Facebook.
Yeah, just Meta. So one of the things that they talk about in the report is the macro risks, right? What people are worried about with the slowdown of VC activity in Europe over the next 5 years, and lack of talent wasn't one of the top 3, but it is coming up in one of the top 5. I'm looking at these figures and going, cool, well, there's lots of available talent right now. Like, surely we're seeing something that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, right? Where people did panic and they did let go, and some businesses that maybe should have let go of staff sooner did. And then there was just a nice little pile of really talented people available to help the earlier stage companies who normally are struggling to hire. Is this sort of potentially fixing the problem?
We've seen a lot of very talented people being offered to our portcos, and I've seen a lot more recruiter activity in my inbox. And I've anecdotally spoken to a lot of founders who are finding it easier and more cost effective to hire already. I don't know how much of that is looking for what you want to see, but I would imagine a proportion. I think on the big tech layoff side, the numbers that I've seen, I did do a little bit of analysis on this, not that I pay too much attention to the numbers because I'm more of a feelings guy than a facts guy, but if you look at the numbers, it doesn't look like the actual base of whatever Facebook, Amazon, Google, or any of the larger tech players has actually dropped that much. So if you look proportionally, they've kind of dropped back to COVID levels. So it's not this massive sway of, oh my God, there's no more people working in Google. They've gone back to 2020 levels. It's like, who gives a fuck? Well, actually, let me just caveat that because I feel very bad for people that have just left a role, joined Google or Amazon or whatever. Oh my God, I'm now in my dream role, and then they will let go. A year later. That must be horrific. So I'm not saying it on the humanistic level. I feel horrendous for the people caught up in that. That said, there is a lot more fluidity, and there are people hiring, and there are VCs and other investors investing, and there will be maybe not the same levels, but there will be new teams, new startups, new things that weren't available because people were sucked into big tech. There's going to be a whole swathe of innovation the other side of, and the smart people are not going to be on the dole for long. So I think there's a lot of numbers. Again, I think the reality is very different when you look at it in context. And I would just urge people to look at these big 400 billions and 200,000s. Just look at it in context and don't believe all you read.
What I thought, Cathy, when I saw the chart was, well, I actually think the question was maybe asked a bit wrong here, because they ask, what are the 3 main macro risks that you see? And then automatically you will have, one not outperforming all the others incredibly much, right? And higher interest rates and inflation risk as the one that they have on top is obviously that is going to be massive. And I think everyone pretty much agrees on that. So in that sense, I would have loved to see this chart, where more people could have said, well, I think it's these 2. But, because I think that there are some parts that are going to be the main drivers of the issues that we will have. And as an example, I don't think many think that lack of talent will be the main thing causing a tech slowdown, right? It will continue to be an issue.
It's just been an issue for years and years and years and years and years.
It always will be, right?
I honestly have a really hard time with this data. I struggle to make any inference or conclusion or whatever, because I just don't understand half of it, if I'm being very honest. Like, I think the time frame is weird in terms of these risks having that impact over that time frame. I think the question, as Andreas said, isn't the best one for us to infer a lot of data, right? Because we ask for 3 and then we present 10, like, okay, so what, right? So I've had a really hard time, and maybe it's just me that I'm dumb, to kind of take out any relevant information for my analysis looking at this. I honestly don't understand more than half of it, if I'm being honest.
What they should do, David, I think what they should do is we should have, I mean, these reports are great clickbait, and they're great for, they've created a conversation between us, and lots of founders and investors will be talking about it, which is great. That was the point of them doing it, to raise their PR. Wonderful. What I'd like to see more.
Fantastic PR.
And we're helping it.
I'd like to see more reports, and no one will do this because it's just not sexy, but I'd like to see more reports based on leading indicators, not lagging indicators. So there will be a version of this report that somebody could compile, which looks at all of the opportunity, leading indicator, all of the aspects that are going to flip the other side of the world is burning, because there is nothing but opportunity here. There is nothing but cash available here, and there is nothing but a world baked with problems right now to solve. So you've got more people coming through, you've got cash available, and you've got more investors and more types of investor coming through. So I think there is a piece of work to be done if anybody listening would want to pick it up.
I love that you're saying this, Dan, because in my head I'm just like, supersedes hype of European tech reports 2023. This is it's a great PR opportunity, even if you just did like a miniature one and you took a couple of the slightly questionable questions within this version.
I have the attention span of a 3-year-old on Blue Smarties, but I will maybe find somebody to have a bash. And Mads, as everyone knows, Mads is an incredible analytical brain, so he'll probably have this data baked into his head somewhere. But I think maybe we will. Maybe we'll do the anti-report. So fuck all of this nonsense and looking back and the world is burning stuff, and let's frame it in a whole new way, because that's the reality. That's what will happen.
Dan, to your point of it, it's just, for me, honestly, it feels like a return to normalcy in every single sense. Because if I take the reports of last year or a year and a half ago and I just make all the headlines negative, I literally have the same report, right?
Yeah. And if you look at the numbers, you could have extrapolated the numbers.
US late stage moving out. What did we say a year ago, right? We said the opposite.
You could have done 15 to 18 numbers and then just drawn a line through. We can almost forget about 19, 20, 21. You can just forget about those years. Who cares?
Yeah, and if we look at the capital invested month by month, okay, yeah, the number is lower than last year. But if you look at the the inclination of the lines, it's the same. Yeah. Close, it's almost the same as the years before. So that means that on a monthly basis, we're back to normal, right? We're not below, we're back to normal, right?
And volumes are the same. So deal count is down, but volume is the same, because people are just doing more with fewer. That's all.
Deal count is back to normal, right? Everything's back to normal.
I'm gonna challenge the normalcy line, right?
I know, but that's why I did that.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm gonna challenge it on one point, because it's the one statistic in this entire report that makes me really depressed. And I think you'll all know where I'm going, because Dan brought it up before we hit record, right? But we're letting women down is my headline. The proportion of women only founding teams raising from VC dropped from a high of 3%, only 3%, guys, of all European venture capital funding in 2018 to now only 1%. And actually just a week before the State of European Tech report dropped, so did the Reykjavik Index for Leadership, which is an annual survey that compares how women and men are viewed in terms of their suitability for positions of power. And it showed that trust in female leaders has fallen markedly throughout the past year, which is just wonderful news for my gender. So I'm bringing this up because I want to know how can I get more people like you, not just women, to fix this, so that we can find a way to actually back more women through venture capital. I'm going to go on a rant for a second, sorry, but one of my biggest frustrations in VC, aside from not seeing enough money going to women, is lots of people seem to purposefully be doing something good to support poor female founders, because they don't know what they're doing and they don't know how to pitch VCs, and God knows how they even know how to run a business, which is why we see lots of VCs doing mentor hours, office hours to help lots of women, but I'm not seeing it come through. Why are we not backing them?
Do you think that VCs wouldn't back, forget the gender, sex, race, color, creed, there could be green from Mars and trisexual, who cares? But do you think if a VC saw an opportunity that was backable, that they wouldn't back that opportunity because it was run by a female founder?
Yes, I think some VCs wouldn't.
I think in many, like femtech as an example, right? I think many of the investors lack the skills to understand that this is then a business opportunity or not. So from that standpoint, I would say absolutely yes, right? But I don't think that applies to all sectors. But coming back to the report, Cathy, I have one single question, which you don't have the answer, and I think no one really does unless we did the report, which is we have female, male, and then mixed. In a perfect world, I would want mixed to be at 100, right? And that for me is what really matters. So what would be, in my view, really important is understanding what is inside that mix, because it can be a very positive picture, or it can also be a very negative picture, and it would show exactly the same on that same graph, right? So I think again, as I said before, have a hard time making any inference that I find like useful, right? And about the other index, I don't really understand how it's calculated, so I'll refrain from talking. But I think that what we're seeing when there's less capital, I think access to the industry gets harder, and that obviously hurts where diversity is less achieved. So that is female, of course, but also other races, other credos, stuff like that. I think we'll see a return to normalcy not being a good thing here. We'll see a return to normalcy there as well, where access to the industry will not be easier than it was in the last 2 years, that's for sure. Right?
This conversation to me, Cathy, remains incredibly difficult. In both to talk about and figure out what it's obvious that it's too little money, but I'm having a very difficult time with understanding what is optimum, what is actually doable right now with the talent mass that we have that do tech. Because there's part that's VCs that are not investing in female founders. I have met people who I would also think I'm sure this person is not the greatest D&I representative in VC and in the angel landscape. So definitely that is a problem. But I don't think that the benchmark that we should go for is it being 100% mixed, or it being, of course, on a long-term scale we should. But in the short term, there is the problem or the natural nature of tech being that it's primarily the STEM fields, which for a long time has been male dominant, and at the same time we have in the labor force / career approach to life, approach to career, we have also for a bunch of super awful reasons, but we have seen much fewer women entrepreneurs. So I would love to see someone compile those numbers and say, well, this is probably with the talent mass of entrepreneurs that try to raise more women. I know the numbers, Andreas. Could you dive into that, Dan? Because this really upsets me, and I get punched a lot for having this conversation. And I've tried to have the female founder conversation 3 or 4 times over the last year, and I get a lot of vitriol, and I understand why. It's an incredibly emotive topic. But the figures, the last time I looked, and somebody can look them up and update them, was around 140,000 businesses were female founded in the UK this year. So I can only talk about the UK figures. That's all I remember. But that's just under 20% of all new businesses that were female founded registered. Now, of that 20%, around 5%, just under 6%, around 5% were what we would call venture backable entities. The others being mom and pop hairdressers or mom and pop fruit and veg sellers or other kinds of businesses. So there was the number of available female founded businesses that were venture backable in any, whether it's consumer or business or anything, was around 5%. So the numbers coming into the market are incredibly small. I see around 2 years ago, it was around 1 in 50 female founded businesses that only do B2B. Now it's even less than that. And I think that's probably because we're not that attractive for women to approach for a variety of reasons, and we need to get smarter at that. Cool. But there aren't that many female founders in the space to invest in the first place. I don't care if you are green, brown, yellow, male, female, have a penis and a vagina. I don't care. I want a venture backable entity to invest in. But they have to be there in the first place. So I have a solution. And I think the first thing we need to do, especially in the UK, I think in Denmark and Scandis, they're much smarter at this, is to stop this crazy bullshit when it comes to, if you have a family, if you're a working mum or you're a working family, and I struggle with this because my wife's an entrepreneur, how you balance childcare. So all we need to do is get some of the childcare or family support to enable the space for the family, not just the mum, but the family to be able to take different decisions. And in the UK, you don't get childcare support until the child is 3, by which point you don't really need it. The child is fairly self-sufficient and can wipe its own bum pretty much. And so I think if we wanted more women to found viable tech startup, there's an education piece that we need more women in STEM, we need more women in startup across the board.
But I think if we just get the family support piece done, I think the world would be very different.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to women in tech more generally, beyond purely women entrepreneurs, there are many, 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 many different facets that need to be fixed. Childcare would be amazing, particularly in the UK. Like when I talk to friends about, potentially in the future having a child and being in Spain, the cost to me to have childcare is significantly cheaper, right? And maybe it's more of a socialist attitude here. It's much easier to gain access to it. I have a friend here who has twin baby boys, and when she put both of them into childcare, she gets a 50% discount on the second child. Fantastic, because they're going in together. Maybe maybe there'll be something. It would work nicely as a PR campaign, but it should come from a good place, right? But now maybe there's space for a VC in London that has a creche connected to it. Female founders, come on down, use the space. Put your child here, we'll get the bill, we'll help you build from the start, have some space. That could be quite a nice thing to try. But there's lots and lots of different things to fix. I think the challenge that I would present to anyone listening to the podcast today, because I don't think we can answer it completely ourselves, is moving into 2023, what more can you do to either inspire more female entrepreneurship or to support a female entrepreneur, obviously with the notion that it's going to be a business that could be backed by VC?
I think that's absolutely correct. It's about creating champions, both in VC and in entrepreneur land, startup land. And then of course it's also, us keep iterating that it's not okay to not be D&I responsible. It's not okay to blah, blah, and also when we see it, say it out loud and not be afraid of touching it. But I do think that the majority of the VCs, at least that I hang with, all of the VCs that I hang with, would never, not invest in a great backable startup just because it was a female founded one or had mixed gender for that reason.
Can we put a list of them in the next Lowdown?
There's no way. I mean,
that's all my friends.
But guys, we've got to understand the backstory here is that VCs are gamblers. We're gamblers by job. I mean, that's what we do. We have to back winners. We have to get anything that's a possible challenge off the table. So it doesn't matter what the opportunity is. If there's a way to make money and it's on thesis, we will do it regardless of anything.
I think there's an interesting reflection, right? So if you look at biotech as an example, that's a whole sector. The whole sector, I think, and my numbers aren't updated because I looked at them like 5 years ago and my brain isn't that good at remembering things. But I think it had like 3 times more female founders than other sectors. Why? My assessment is when you look at education, there's 3 times more women studying in biotech related areas, right? It's like no brainer, right? And so I honestly think about it, if we're producing talent in these areas, then this talent part of it will start wanting to get into entrepreneurship, right? And I think it's just a really interesting case study to look at because all of the other macro shit, right, is the same for that sector, right? So it's a really interesting example where you can see the direct impact of having more people graduating in the space that are female versus the others, right? So I just like to bring it up as an example because I think it's very, very insightful. I think it's all about education, honestly.
Yeah, same with B2B, B2C. I mean, a lot of the female founders that I work with, I can't invest in because they're doing consumer. And there's a massive divide between consumer and business. So I think there will always be a natural leaning for certain spaces, sectors to be more one gender than the other. Will that change over time? Maybe. At the moment, that's the reality. If you look at like deep tech B2B stuff, it's 95% male and hardly any black. There's lots of brown people, hardly any black people, hardly any females, hardly lots of Asian, other minorities. So there's a lot of very stereotypical answers to the question. Will that change over time? I hope so.
So I'm going to wrap up the show now, but I am going to leave everyone listening with a little bit of homework. So aside from figuring out how you're going to fix this problem, my other argument would be the next time you see a small child, whether they are a boy or a girl, you treat them the same. You talk to them about the same things. You get them interested in building. You get them interested in designing things, because the only way that we start to fix this problem is you fix it from the very, very wee tiny little ages, and you get them aware that they can do anything, and then that will have a knock-on effect. But it starts with adults and re-educating adults around how they behave around others. On that note, I am going to officially wrap up the show. So that's it. Thank you for joining. Make sure to check out the newsletter on EU.VC as well. Head to LinkedIn if you want to continue the conversation. We're not going to punch Dan. He's been very nice. And actually, there's a very positive message off of the back of this, right? Like, we see a lot of opportunity in the state of European tech for 2023 and beyond. It's just rewiring the reports that's come from Atomico. And we'll stay tuned for the new hype report that will come out next year. Also on LinkedIn, you'll find news on the latest funds that have been raised, as well as the Who's Hiring section, together with a whole lot of GIFs, memes, and emojis. And we'll try to keep entertaining you. Bye.
The 15th of December is the day you need to have in mind. EUVC is hosting a webinar with Cathy, David, and Andreas. Cathy will show us how to approach PR as an individual and as a firm. Sign up at eu.vc/events.